I'm exhausted. As I'm standing up here with my colleagues trying to figure out how to verbalize what that exhaustion is, hearing the pain and the hurt in their voices, hearing the pain of the voices that cried in this state on Saturday as they were brutally murdered by a white supremacist while grocery shopping. I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted because it's extremely trying to wear this black skin every day. It's extremely trying to live in a space where racism continues to thrive. It's extremely trying to live in a state where hate is perpetuated in all of the spaces we all occupy. But I feel that as we're talking about gun violence, and as we're talking about resolutions, and as we're talking about keeping the memory of the 10 people who were gunned down alive, there's one ism that's missing from this conversation today, and that's capitalism. Capitalism says that it's okay for you to purchase weapons. Capitalism says that it's okay for people to suffer. Capitalism says that there has to be an underclass. There has to be a foot on the neck of black people. There has to be a foot on the neck of minorities all across this state. Capitalism says it's okay for white supremacy to reach the highest levels of government in our state and in our nation. So if we're serious about fighting racism, and if we're serious about fighting systemic oppression, and if we're serious about making sure that black people get the entire pie and not the pieces, then we have to ensure that those two isms, racism and capitalism, are a part of this discussion. Separate from the pain and tragedy that we saw in Buffalo, gun violence is running rampant in our communities. And this week and this month, as we acknowledge Gun Violence Month as a caucus, and I thank my colleagues for being here, I brought up a family before knowing about Saturday who's experienced gun violence. The youngest victim of gun violence in my district was a 10-year-old baby who had his entire future ahead of him. And believe it or not, just because the gunman that took his life was black, it was white supremacy that stood on the foot of the neck of that individual and didn't acknowledge the pain and hurt and frustration, the mental health, the resources, the services that are lacking, the things that will work to prevent gun violence from permeating our communities. I want to close with some hope. And even though that I'm exhausted as a 26-year-old, or soon to be 26-year-old, God willing, black man representing the 31st Assembly District in the legislature, I want to close with some hope. One of the victims of Saturday's terrible tragedy was a 77-year-old woman who was a church-going sister who helped out at her food pantry and did everything that she could to contribute to her community. And in this moment where we're looking for that hope, in this moment where we're looking for that direction, we should look to the life of that 77-year-old woman who allowed the Lord to be the lamp of her footsteps and guide her to service. We serve here in the legislature to ensure that never again happens. And we have the power of the pen, the power of the majority in both houses, to ensure that we don't lose a single person to gun violence, a single person to hate, a single person to systemic oppression, and a single person to capitalism. So I want to thank my colleagues. I want to thank Assemblywoman Micaëlle Solange for organizing this today, our leaders in both houses, and my colleagues who have to go back to black districts, my colleagues that have to go back to districts where hate permeates, because on their chest hangs heavy their ability and will to protect their constituents. And that fight lies here, and that fight lies in our power to legislate here in the legislature. Thank you, everyone.